I'm Casey Patterson.
I'm Felicia Jones.
And this is Thriving While Black, the podcast. Our guest today is Karren Lane, Deputy Mayor of Community Safety for the City of Los Angeles. Karren is a former program director for the Leading for Power and Change portfolio of the California Wellness Foundation. She was also a program director around community organizing for the Weingart Foundation. And when I first met her, she was vice president of policy at the Community Coalition. Karren is a trained attorney and one of my most trusted confidants, and someone who brings all the truth to power that I've ever seen in a powerful Black woman. We are so happy to have her today. Felicia, how do you know Karren?
Yeah, so I met Karren, I think it was around 2016, in her capacity with Community Coalition. She was leading a huge campaign, Prop 47, and really organizing statewide partners at that time to make sure that we were redirecting Prop 47 dollars to schools and to different community-based programs. And so I got to know her in that capacity. I had not seen her before. I actually never saw her. I heard her voice on, I think we were doing conference calls.
Way back when?
Way back when. I don't even think we were doing Zooms, but now I can't remember. But I know I didn't see her for a long time, so I didn't know who she was. I just knew her name. And then just got to witness her brilliance. She managed that coalition so well. And then later, I reached out to her because I needed support. We were trying to pass a similar resolution that they passed in LA City. Oh, yeah. And so I said, hey, we're trying to do something like this in San Bernardino. And I said, we want to really model what you all did. Mm-hmm. And she and her team just, without question, aided us in that process. And then we later connected in her role with Weingart, and she supported. She funded COPE at that time, and I got to know her more, and it's just been a beautiful relationship. And I have witnessed her advocacy for nonprofit organizations like COPE and several others, and she's just been a huge champion for us. So, and just a smart, brilliant woman. Mm-hmm. I'm just excited to know her and be in her company. So,
absolutely. Same. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, when I first met her, she was in her role at Community Coalition. Similarly, I had known her name before I knew her and her face because, we didn't do Zoom back then. It was all conference calls. So you knew people's voices, but not their faces.
That's right.
And I'd heard about her and all the work that she was leading for Community Coalition. And where I got to know her was through the Black Equity Initiative, which, as you know, was the predecessor to the Black Equity Collective. And she showed up in that space sort of representing, because COCO was one of the funded organizations, and she showed up in that space representing COCO, and she brought the fire. I mean, talking about what Black-led organizations need, how funders need to show up differently. And then when she left COCO, she actually started consulting before she got into philanthropy. And we actually hired her to do a landscape analysis around Black leadership development, which is how we started funding. We funded this pilot with Bold that she actually scoped, for us through the project that we had hired her to do. Then she got into the Weingart Foundation, then over to the Wellness Foundation, and she just became a powerhouse in philanthropy, really, I would say, transforming and upending a lot of the status quo and really working with us as strategic partners and helping to think differently, helping philanthropy to think differently and to behave differently when it comes to funding organizing, funding grassroots work, funding Black leadership in particular. So like I said, she is one of my most trusted confidants. And if I ever have a question about how I'm showing up or what's going on in the world and whether I need to be straight about something, the person other than you that I call is Karren Lane.
Oh, I know that to be true. Yeah, she does bring the heat.
She brings it. So we're going to have a good conversation today. So please welcome to the show, Karren Lane. So, Karren, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to see both of you.
Good to see you too.
We're
Good to
glad
see you
have
too.
So we love to ask all of our guests about their childhood. So I'm going to ask you, tell us about your childhood and growing up, and then also tell us what are some memories you have that shape who you are and who you become.
Yeah, I'm originally from Gardena, California, so it's the South Bay of Los Angeles, part of the South Bay, but borders borders Los Angeles and the city. And I think my experience of my childhood really mirrors Black LA. So my grandparents migrated here from Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas, landed in parts of South Los Angeles. Uh, Grandfathers worked in factories, like a lot of Black men of that time. My grandmother was a domestic worker, so she cleaned and then worked her way up to becoming a nurse's assistant,
Oh,
what
wow.
was
Oh,
really
wow.
an accomplishment for her and the family. And both my parents were born and raised in Los Angeles and parts of LA and South Los Angeles. And I think one, my grandmother really impacts my identity and shaped my identity, obviously with my parents as well. But my grandmother just coming out, I think, of the South and really experiencing racial discrimination. And she never articulated it that way. It was a lot of warnings about life and what it meant to be a Black woman. And just sharing her story. She would share stories that a lot of her employers wouldn't refer to her by her name, but by girl. And so that story always stayed with me around what it means to be Black, but what it also means to be a Black woman and to be seen. And I think some of my early memories, I always say, is, I'm definitely Gen X. And I always say that with that, all of the strengths that we have as a generation, but we were also one of the first generations to become criminalized.
That's right.
And so some of my memories in growing up in Gardena, it was a suburb, a working class suburb, but there was a liquor store. It was a liquor store called King's Liquor, and I remember distinctively there was a time where we would a lot of kids on our block, we would ride our bikes. It'd be 10, 12 of us. It was a lot of us, and we would ride up and just you ride your bike and jump off, and just we would go into the store and buy 5-cent candy. And then I distinctively remember coming into that store when ownership changed, that there was a bulletproof glass that we couldn't all come in at the same time. And so at that time, I started to see the physical part of my community start to change. And it's ironic because we're starting to see that again. Part of one of the things that changed is that we couldn't go to the mall without, a super chaperone, no more than four people. And it was really this reaction to youth violence and gang violence. And so we're seeing that again now in some of our local malls where youth of color are being monitored again in that way. And so that really shaped me about a feeling of justice and what does it mean to be just, safety, very conscious of that, and just really being raised with that fire in my belly about when something wasn't right. And I think that shaped who I am.
We'll talk about full circle with your job now as Deputy Mayor of Community Safety. We'll come back to that, but I'm hearing you say a lot of things that really speak to, who you are, in your career.
And you're a lawyer. So tell us the journey from being a lawyer to an organizer. And clearly that those early experiences perhaps inspired you to go into law. What was the motivator there?
Yeah, really after college, I taught. I taught special education and in New York, and part of that experience as a special education teacher was seeing. I was taught middle school, so seeing young people. One, how young people who were in the child welfare system were treated and advocated during those education conferences. But also, I saw the connection between that and the criminal justice
Yes,
system.
of course.
And so I really went to law school to become an advocate for young people.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
And you get there and you start to do your clerking and your that. And so I had an opportunity, he's no longer with us, to really learn under an attorney called John Caldwell. He's passed now, but he was a court-appointed attorney. And so he had a lot of cases of young people being tried as adults. And so I knew he was a good lawyer and just, he was passionate, and I learned a lot about systems but the laws were just archaic, and so there's not a lot, that you can do when the black letter law says one thing or not. And then an opportunity came to go to the Community Coalition to actually work on policy. They asked, hey, we know you just graduated from law school. That at that time there was a shift in California's landscape called AB 109.
Yeah, that's right.
That moved supervision of low-level offenses to the county. And obviously, Community Coalition had an interest in making sure South Los Angeles communities were served and were not negatively impacted. So I joined the coalition and really learned how to organize. Was really trained by one of my first campaign, Susan Burton from A New Way of Life.
Oh, yeah.
I credit her. She's like, have you heard
Pioneer.
of?
Yes.
Have you heard of this ordinance that's happening? I'm CCO. I think it was the name of the ordinance that was going to limit the amount of transitional housing
Yes, that's right.
in the
Yeah.
city. And literally, she said there's a hearing at 2:00 at City Hall. The same day, she was like, you need to be there. And I went there, heard from
Wow.
agencies, from people who were impacted, and just learned how to build a campaign and get people involved. So
Wow. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, you really grew up professionally at Community
did.
Coalition, which, for those who don't know, was founded after the civil unrest of 1992, really in response to what was a lack of services and a lack of really care, in the community. And it was started by our current mayor,
Right.
Karren Bass. So talk a little bit about how the events of the 90s, how the civil unrest perhaps influenced you, particularly sort of growing up at COCO, which was an organization that was founded out, of that unrest. How did those events of the 90s help to sort of build your political consciousness?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I wasn't quite a teen during the 92 uprising. I was like in elementary school. So I do remember, I remember it vividly. I remember my mom, I was at my grandmother's, which I usually was in the afternoons, and my mom couldn't get home. So I remember, I roll that back. My first memory of the rebellion was when the verdict came out.
Yeah.
And my grandmother said, and we were sitting in the kitchen, she said, LA's going to be on fire tonight. Like she just named it. She's very prophetic. And so I just remember as a kid, and lo and behold, that night, it was, the city went on fire. So I do remember that. I don't know, I certainly couldn't process it in that way, but I knew that there was anger. It lasted for a long time. I remember we couldn't go back to school for a few days, and there was a lot of debate. There was some folks in the community that felt, why are we burning down our own community? There were others that this was, justified rage, right? And so I certainly remember it. I think coming to Community Coalition helped me put my life experience in that context.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And so you go from personal to political. And I think that's what, the coalition helped me do. And it was really engaging with not only service providers with lived experience, have gone through incarceration, hearing stories from folks from All of Us or None when we were doing work around like sheriff reform, telling their stories of being just really abused, brutally abused in the LA jail system. So all of that, again, like hearing the stories of how people were experiencing oppression in that way. But also understanding that when we organize our political power, like when we come out the shadows, right? it's not just my experience, other people are experiencing this too. And when we organize our political power, we can actually change policy and change systems. And so I think that's what I take from Community Coalition in my experience.
And so, from Community Coalition to philanthropy to now in the mayor's administration, in charge of community safety. And you just talked about some elements of community safety. And tell us a little bit about your role and how community safety is being both defined and redefined under this administration, and your role in helping to shape it.
Yeah, I mean, what I always say is that what the mayor recognized, which I think is groundbreaking, and I think people are losing that, right? That what the mayor is trying to do is doing is institutionalizing the idea of community-based crime prevention, one,
Say more
and
about that.
intervention,
Yeah.
right? So, as a government function, how do we actually have infrastructure in place to support community-led efforts to prevent crime?
Yeah, that's
And
good.
what I say, and I agree with her, is that once police have been called, fire has been deployed, a tent is up, we've already destabilized somebody's life, somebody's
Right,
neighborhood, a
right,
school. And so, how do we actually invest in the things that we know prevent community harm and individual harm? And the mayor has elevated that as a government function by creating an office of community safety. So most
Wow.
mayors and most cities have offices of public safety, traditional public safety institutions, the police departments, fire departments, and all of those are needed. And the mayor has said, and those need to be invested in because those are city services, right? But what also needs to be invested in is community-led approaches. And we have to provide the infrastructure for communities to
that's
actually keep their
wonderful.
neighborhoods safe. And so I was happy and proud that she thought of me to invite me to play that role. So it's been amazing working with community violence intervention workers, working with organizations and agencies that lead anti-recidivism work. So how do we actually break cycles
Yeah.
of crime and actually give people what they need to thrive and to feel successful, and then to actually start to think about how do we have more first responders who are civilians, who both have lived experience as well as trained professionals to deal with really public health crises, instead of using law enforcement, incarceration, and suppression to do that. And so that's the work that we're doing, is really making that a government function and elevating it as a service for Angelenos.
Oh, that's
What does it
wonderful.
mean to build infrastructure?
Yeah.
Infrastructure is a really fancy word for people.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah,
In my opinion.
Yeah,
I mean, when we
yeah,
talk about
yeah.
nonprofit organizations and even as a funder working in philanthropy, we would talk a lot about infrastructure for nonprofits. And really what we're talking about is the investment in people as individuals for them to experience their own leadership. Creating space. So how do you create strong organizations so that they have space to lead? And how do you create space for people to work together?
Yeah.
And really that's what infrastructure, I think, in any setting mean, is how do you invest in people to bring their full potential in a space to lead and help others lead. And so as a government function, what we try to do is one, when we talk about dollars getting on the ground, how do we get taxpayer dollars back into communities for them to actually, communities to use those dollars in a way that serves the dignity and health of their neighborhoods and their communities? So the government is a funder, right? And so it's getting dollars to the ground effectively. It's creating coordination. The beauty of we're not a department; we're the mayor's office, and the mayor is the executive manager of the city. And so we're able to not only just fund nonprofit organizations, but how do we actually work and activate city departments to support that work, whether it be recreation and park, LAPD, fire, sanitation. Because this work sits in our office, we're able to also direct city departments to actually support and advance the vision of communities around safety. So it's dollars, it's coordination. That's part of the work of building the infrastructure to support community-led community safety work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how are you all navigating the tension around police accountability and this new model of community safety? How are you, how are you all navigating that?
I think I think the mayor is taking lead from community, and as much as we want to believe that all Black people or all people of color want to abolish police, it actually doesn't show up that way. Residents want police; they want the right kind of policing.
Yeah.
They want the police to come when they call them and leave when they don't need them.
Okay.
And so right? But they also want investments in their youth. They want clean streets. They want access to parks. They want lighting. Part of my work is we're doing partnered with UCLA to do a community engagement process. We're going to build something called a blueprint for community safety in
wonderful.
LA. So we
Yeah,
hope
that's
to release
wonderful.
that in the summer. So what it includes is both surveys as well as listening sessions. And so I participated in the first initial ones, and these were in Boyle Heights. Police didn't come up.
Oh, interesting.
People talked about lighting in the parks,
Yeah.
parking
absolutely.
enforcement,
Yeah.
and this might seem obvious, but this was a question like the UCLA is working with the mayor. Tell her what you want to see. When do you feel safe in your home? When do you feel safe in your neighborhood? When do you feel safe in the city? And when don't you feel safe in those settings? And what people really lifted was, Boyle Heights is a apartment dense community.
Right. Okay.
And so we don't have open space. And so, from elders to young people, they talked about the parks. And because that was their open space, right? And so, there was some mention of police and their engagement with youth. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think what the mayor resists, and I agree with her, maybe not as an activist, but coming into government, the biggest lesson that she's taught me, and it resonated with me, is that your political view cannot dominate how we govern.
Oh wow.
Because we govern for everyone.
That's
Yeah.
right, that's
And
right.
so for her, it's and both. It's not either or. And so as an administration, we have resisted that dichotomy of that. If you support community safety, then you don't support police.
Right.
Or
Right.
we know that communities want both, and they want services in a way that honors the dignity of people that live in neighborhoods. And so that's what really drives us.
Yeah, and I think what's so
wonderful.
interesting about that to me is the theme around being community driven, sort of started, I think, really as you described the work that you intended to do as a youth advocate when you first went on to become a lawyer.
Right.
Sort of followed you into community coalition, certainly followed you into philanthropy, and now into your role in government. I'm curious if you could talk about that transition, though, from community to philanthropy, because a lot of the work that we do is with nonprofit organizations, Black-led organizations in particular. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what did you see in community that in your transition to philanthropy, you felt like was a missing element, in the philanthropic space that you thought you could and should sort of bring into the philanthropic space so that they could be more community driven?
Yeah, I think I had the blessing. I feel like God always orders my steps. And so the first place I landed was the Weingart Foundation, which really taught me, and I give a lot of just credit and respect to Fred Ali and
Yeah.
Belinda at the
Yeah.
Weingart Foundation. that Weingart, I think, is a foundation that uh, simplified grant making versus I would compare more larger foundations. But what Fred and Belinda gave me the space to do, which I knew is that you couldn't, when we did 47, Prop 47, we were community coalition, but community coalition is really a part of a network of organizations that work together to meet the needs of South LA. The same thing in the IE. Organizations have informal networks.
That's right.
And so, but that coalition is only as strong as its parts.
That's right.
And so what I knew coming in is that you can't win policy change, not just one organization.
That's right.
So how do you actually invest in the coalition? And so I pushed for that. I knew who Community Coalition's partners were. I knew who was leading education work. I would always ask, and Charles, he's now with the Irvine Foundation, but Charles did this as a grant maker when I was on the other side. He would ask, who else should we be funding that we're not? And so I took those pieces of having really good program officers when I was a nonprofit leader, and I brought that, tried to use some of those pieces, but then I also knew what was missing on the ground. One of my first, and I'm really proud of this, was really bringing resources to gang intervention.
Yeah.
So, Weingart had funded GRID and Summer of Success, and so has Wellness and TCE, but really investing to like grass-led intervention organizations that were really keeping peace in neighborhoods and communities, and then investing in innovative strategies that they said they needed. So healing circles, how do you coordinate safe passage? Again, so how do you coordinate? How do you invest in coordination that communities do with no resources? That's what I try to invest in. And I'm thankful that Weingart not only gave me the space, but they also gave me the tool. Well, how do you work with that small organization to help them think about their infrastructure and their sustainability? And that I think I take everywhere I go.
Yeah. And I think that really leads me into the next question that I'm really curious about, because you've had this perch of being on the front lines in community. You've had this perch of funding that community work as, in philanthropy, and now, sitting in government with policy and sort of deploying the resources of government on behalf of community. So I'm curious, having sort of sat at these three very important tables now, what do you see as sort of the needs in order to really transform from systems of harm to systems of care? Like, what is really needed in order to move the needle on that?
That's a big question. I don't know. I have one answer for.
Okay. That's fair.
Yes.
I struggle a little bit sometimes. I mean, you might need to cut this out, but I struggle sometimes because the scarcity model permeates in both philanthropy as well as government. Now, in government, it feels much more real, right? Because there's a lot of city functions of the city in government. And then it's always ironic to me sometimes when I have to now engage with philanthropy, because there's still the contradiction of but if your corpus was in the tax base, right, all things would be possible, right? And so there's that tension, I think, between government and philanthropy, and that that a lot of that corpus is being held because of tax. So if we have fair tax policies,
they're both public dollars,
really
right? And so I think there's always an issue of funding, and there's often the issue of who. So sometimes it's not that you don't have the right idea, and sometimes it's not that you don't have the resources. Oftentimes it's like, well, who's going to lead this work? And so when we're trying to build systems, leadership really matters. And so I think those are the challenges, but I don't think I have an answer for that right now, Casey. I think I'm too new into government. I just made a year a couple weeks ago. So I don't think I have a one clear answer, but I certainly can identify the challenges.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But I actually think that's a good point because I mean, I've certainly faced this when there's this question around, but who's going to do it? Who's
Right.
going to do it?
Right.
It's like you tend to go to the people who are already doing big, audacious
Right.
things, you know?
Right.
So I actually get this a lot. Well, can't Casey do it? Can't the Black Equity
Right.
Collective do it? And it's like, well, on top of all the other big, audacious things that we have
Right,
going
right.
on. So I think that this idea that you're positing around leadership development is really real, you know, and it's one that I think when we think about what's really needed to transform, if we did have to boil it down, you know, I think leadership would be a really key ingredient.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree.
So, again, you have this, insight into organizing, philanthropy, government now. Where should we still be pushing? Like, if you had to look out in the landscape and know that there are gaps, where should organizations still be pushing? What's like the new transformative breakthrough that sort of needs to happen out there? And how do we navigate the politics of change to see something audacious happen?
Ooh, it's hard not to think in the moment.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm thinking,
the
the
moment
moment.
we're in is
Yeah.
the budget, right? And so one of the things that I'm going to say something that probably will really get me in trouble, but one of the things that I understand now
I say, what's new?
I'm
You've
like-
done that, you've done that a lot in
Come
your
on,
career.
yes. You're courageous, so come on, let's hear it.
like I think we have to get more specific as a
Okay.
movement. So I've been in this is now my second budget, and we want more investment in mental health, youth development, right? Those are some of the ones. But what I appreciate, because it's difficult even for me, is that, but what line item do you want the mayor to increase? Right. And which is very different, right? Because we have mental
Yeah,
health
yeah,
scattered across
yeah,
the city.
yeah.
Mental health services isn't really a true function of the city. It's a function of government, a county government.
Yeah, that's right.
And so to move the needle, I think when you have people in power who are trying to advance a social justice agenda that aligns with your agenda, how do you actually get more specific? And I think that sounds very elementary, but at the same time, now being
Yeah.
on this side, when I'm in people don't engage me enough. So I have to actually reach out to social justice organizations. Hey, what's happening? Are you a part of this coalition? Which I think is that's hurtful to me.
Yeah.
It's like I don't want to hear from you by the time you're protesting. Like you actually can engage with power right now to actually move the needle. And then let's talk about specifically what you want to see, right? And I wouldn't say that's across the board, but it has been surprising to me that people who I was on the front lines with and has my cell phone number are not reaching out to me in a meaningful way to engage and to like move power, right? Like the power analysis is how do you move power? And there's moments where I feel like, well, our strategies got so limited that we organized to move the decision maker. But if the decision maker is somebody you actually don't have to put the external power on, then it's almost like, well, I don't even want to engage, right? And so
That's wisdom. Yeah.
the mayor has said from last year, and only one organization really took her up on it, don't wait until after I do the budget. Talk to me early, right? Like,
yeah.
talk to me early about what you want to see. And then I would take it a step further and then tell us specifically what you want to see.
Do you think that's a function, though, of people not really understanding how city government works,
I
and
do.
more specifically around
do.
like budget cycles and what's even in the budget? How do you even read a budget?
All of that. Like as I've engaged with folks, because it is difficult. The budget is very difficult. Even sitting in government, like we have to have like sessions and people digest it. But the other thing and this is the controversial part that I hesitated to say, is how much are base building organizations truly engaging with their members? Because as an activist class, you may not rely on subsidized city programming, right?
That's right.
Whether you're, making a lot of money or not, but your base, if you're really organizing residents, they could tell you what city programs are beneficial. But are we engaging, right? See, you understand what I'm saying? So you may not know, that the elder program, aging, there was a food program.
Right.
Well, because you may not benefit from it, you just may not know about it. So while you're making general demands about, we want to see more investments in people, what's helpful is, that lunch program for the aging population, we saw that that's getting cut, but our members actually benefit from that. We want to now we can invest in something. We can have a debate. We can have a back and forth. But the generalized demand around more mental health, more, it's like, okay, but where, sure,
where?
where?
Yeah,
Like, how do
yeah,
we do that?
yeah.
And some of that responsibility relies on government. I'm not saying there's failure just
Yeah,
in
of course.
community. How do we make the budget process more accessible and understand,
Yeah.
digestible? And that's our work to do. But I think when you say, like, from the community's perspective,
Yeah.
push on us around, politics is about the distribution of resources. Push on us around specifically, what do you want to see investments in? To me, that's the campaign, because you're going to get a win that's going to create a material difference in somebody's life.
Yeah.
Instead of the vague kind of, does it make sense what I'm
Oh,
saying?
it does.
Yeah,
It
it
does.
does.
So I've just been feeling that lately. There's just some of the demands that do come, they're too broad, or
You can't
I'm not
define the
sure
win.
if that's
Yeah.
really gonna make a difference that you
Yeah.
think it's gonna make. It sounds good to demand for this, particular thing, but now seeing behind the veil, it's like, actually,
that's
that's not
not
going to
it.
really move the needle.
Yeah.
It's not. So I think it's a disconnect a little bit.
When
I
would you
appreciate
suggest
that.
organizations begin to engage in the budget? Like, give us like the general timeline.
I think this by January. There's a moment where revenue and you don't know, and I think they're still settling some of that. But you should start to engage with government and structures, I think, by January.
Okay.
So as even, the governor, the mayor, right, get to them as they're thinking about what priorities should be. And again, concretely, as much as you can. And I think people can get to that.
Of course.
If they're really engaging with their base, and it's not just a group of people that you agree with. And I think that's the beauty, not to be long-winded. I was happy that I started organizing in a resident-based organizing,
Yes.
because issue-based organizing, you're organizing everybody that agrees with you around that solution.
That issue, yeah.
When you have to organize in a neighborhood, in particular a neighborhood that's impacted by crime and poverty, you got to navigate, okay, well, it's not just, everybody doesn't always agree. And so how do we bring people into a political solidarity moment and vision? That's work. That's a different level of work.
That is a different
than
level of work.
we are demanding this particular policy solution. Everybody who agrees come, and let's just talk to each other. That's hard work too.
I was going to say it's hard work.
Yeah,
that's hard work too.
All of it is hard
And that's
work.
the
Yeah.
work I feel like that takes a lot of time, that not a lot of people want to invest in, that they don't see the sort of immediate quote unquote win around, and, that feels a little bit non-concrete,
Right.
enough to really invest in. But that is that those sort of spaces in the middle,
Right.
is where we really need the time, as you talked about
Right.
with leadership development,
Absolutely.
the time and the space, to really dig in and discover what's possible and really lean in, with
Yeah.
residents.
And Susan Burton would always say this, and that's another nugget I took into philanthropy. Susan, they go down to Union Station, they just wait for women who they know are coming home. And so she says that, philanthropy will fund the outcome, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really fund the transformation work. When that woman gets off the bus, that conversation that gets her to believe that if I go with this person, to
Something's
how
possible.
And then the work, so that's just my own empowerment and belief that I can change my own life, right? And then to the transformation work to believe your voice actually could change the lives of the masses. And so it's not always a clean cut. It's not the same thing that you do with everyone, but how do we invest in that transformation work? And even just acknowledge it is the biggest challenge, I think, when we talk about leadership development.
Oh, I love that truth.
Yeah, that is truth. So tell us another truth.
Okay.
You've mentioned a couple of Black women in leadership. You yourself are a Black woman in leadership. How are we failing you as a Black woman in leadership?
I have to say, I feel like I've always had a village around me and have always had support. So I don't think community is failing me in any way.
Well, that's good to hear.
I think community has supported me so much in government. I can't say enough without crying. I can call, whether it be, Twin from APUU or Taco from, I could call them at any moment, Donnie and Watts, even, as Black and brown communities have Skip Townsend here, and then Blinky Rodriguez in the Valley. I can call these folks at any point, at any time at night. What's happening? I need this. And very, very supportive. Henry ICS, certainly can always call on Coco or Pete White. So I think community you all both, and certainly Casey, you helped me through philanthropy. I think I can call folks and people have me. And I always say that, push come to shove, community's going to catch me. So
that's right. That's good.
That's real. That's real.
So I can't point to a failure on the part of the community. I think people have supported me and protected me and elevated me. Akila Sherrills. People have tried to talk bad about the administration, and he's backed people up. It's a new day in LA, So,
but I think that's part of the lesson too, is that one of the ways that we can support Black women in leadership is to be a safety net for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
So when you think about the idea of thriving while Black, what images and possibilities come to mind for you?
Oh, I know it sounds cliche, but I just think people being at peace, and that is not as accessible as we think. It's not about just breathing. We have communities that are constantly in schisms, right? Where, so when I think about thriving, and the picture that comes in my mind is being at Nickerson Gardens, being at Jordan Downs, and young people are just being young, and having, regardless of what people might have done in the past, this idea that because this older person in my community is standing outside, is present, they feel safe to play basketball, to be kids. And to me, that's what thriving is just to be in a space of peace where you can experience your humanity in a way, and with others, in that connection. And so I just think, Felicia, to answer that question, people don't always have a fair shot based on conditions and circumstances. And so how do we even that out, and just get everybody what they need, just the basic.
Yeah, I love that.
This your basic needs met, creates a certain level, I think, of peace.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, one of our other guests talked about your cells being at rest.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cells at rest.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we do as a city that doesn't get acknowledged, GRID, there's, criticisms and depending on where it's at, but The one thing the grid model is based on is the recognition of when there's a homicide, a shooting, when violence happens, the mayor's office responds. Because when we go back to the 90s, right? Violence was happening. That's what happens in that community. The only government response was tanks and police and arrests. Everyone is subject to investigation. And what GRID does as a model is it disrupts that. Violence has happened in a community. The mayor's office is going to respond and engage with families and residents. And then we're going to bring people from your community with lived experience, who you know, they're going to respond to be able to support, not to help with the investigation. That's the police's role, right? But that we are going to care about what just happened on this block and connect people to services in a way for them to heal. What we've started to do to layer to that, in particular when young people are killed or when it was close to school, how do we work with LAUSD?
Yeah.
Like there's young people who are going to show up to school on Monday who experienced a trauma.
Who have been traumatized.
Who've been traumatized. And so how do we, get the cells back in peace so that they can thrive while they're at school, or that the mom who just knew that a shooting just happened, has the peace to release their child back into the world to walk to school and they can go to work. And I think there's too many assumptions that when violence happens, it happens over there to those people. They're used to it. That's what it is. But thriving while Black is acknowledging that a disruption has happened. And so how do we bring everybody back down to peace, and that's a part of the government our role, right?
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think
good.
that's really important.
I love it.
So last question, how are you paving a new way for Black folks to thrive?
Oh, am I? It's so hard. I don't believe in celebrity leadership. So when you say, how am I personally? I'm just trying to play my role with everybody else. I'm just trying to be the person I am on the board, or in the game. I'm trying to think of an analogy. And creating space for people to be creative. Government, it's a little hard because it's a bunch of rules, and it should be. But I just want to create space for other people, and then just to do my role as much as I can. And so I think that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh, good.
Yeah.
What excites you or gives you hope about Black California?
I just think we're so resilient. We're such a small part of California, and I will say this, but boy, do we, our role in this country, we protect democracy, we ensure that we have democratic governments. We have always been the consciousness of this nation. And I think in Black California, we do the same thing. As small and dispersed, you can disperse us as far and wide as you want. And not that we're monolithic, I'm not suggesting that. But I think the fact that we have such influence on the politics of this state, how governments function, the way we tell our story, create space for other people to tell their story.
That's right.
I think we are just the consciousness of this state and city and county, and when we use our voice, it matters. And I think there's a reason for that. And so that's what makes me excited.
The courage and the
Wonderful.
consciousness. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Well, you certainly represent both courage and consciousness.
Thank you.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
All right, so we do something called rapid fire. We do it for the culture. We just want to ask you some random questions that you answer quickly.
Okay.
All right, so I'll read off a couple of these questions. So, concerts or festivals?
Festivals.
All right, Roscoe's or Doolin's?
I think Roscoe's.
Roscoe's for you. Okay, peach cobbler or sweet potato pie?
Peach cobbler.
Okay, all right.
Good choice.
That's a good choice, yes. Michael Jackson or Prince?
Oh, that's not fair. Plead the fifth.
Okay, you're not going there, huh? All right. Field trip no, your mom. So field trip volunteer or snack prep volunteer?
Snack prep.
I'm a snack prep.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm field trip. Yeah.
That's all day.
Yeah, I
That is
know.
all
but,
day.
girl, I ain't trying to be in the kitchen preparing no snacks.
Oh, yeah, I'm snack prep all day. Okay. Tell us about your celebrity crush. Who's your celebrity crush?
Probably Idris Elba.
Oh, yeah, he's a good one.
That's it for our rapid fire. Thank you.
Thank you so
Karren
much.
Lane, you are certainly paving a new way. And thank you so much for your leadership. And I think more importantly, thank you for your friendship. You know, you have been a friend to the movement. You've certainly been a friend to us, you know, as women who are also leading and trying to pave a new way. You have been a confidant. And so I just want to personally thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your brilliance with our audience. And thank you for the work you're doing in the mayor's office.
Thank you both. Thank you. You both are really important to the movement, to us being able to advance as a community, as a state. The work that you all do is the work that goes unseen and behind closed doors, but it's that hard work to get people to understand their leadership and to lead in a way that's sustainable, right? And so I appreciate both of you for pushing the needle.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Kira.
Absolutely. Thank you.